What exactly do you mean when you say, I don't want to be married?
I want to show people how beautiful a family can be, and I also want to figure out, not just reveal to other people, but find out why people have backed away from marriage and marriage as it's been known historically.
Someone says, I don't want to have kids, they're too much of a burden. It's like,
All right.
what about having children as a burden? What specifically?
And I asked him if he thinks people should get married young. Right?
What is going on?
Guys, I'm so excited to bring to you today a conversation between myself and Kyle Navratil, the director of the film, What is the Family? But before I do that, I just want you guys to get a sneak preview of the trailer that we put out a couple weeks ago on whatisthefamily.com. Here it is.
In the West, we live in unparalleled abundance. Yet despite all of our progress, the family, the very cornerstone of our civilization next to the individual, is in decline. As a new president takes office, many Americans look to the future with hope. And yet, political issues consume our country because today we remain divided.
In the US, violent clashes broke out on Saturday in the city of Portland, Oregon, where a rally was being held to denounce President Trump's immigration policy.
Domestic turmoil and proxy wars divide America. But within the family, marriage rates are falling, divorce is on the rise, entire communities are disintegrating. But why?
We don't have enough families and children to continue as a nation.
There is one critical outcome that liberal individualism has completely failed to deliver, and that is babies.
Since when did children become a political issue? And what do we mean when we say family? Is the historical understanding of family different from our modern concept? And what does this have to do with today's decline in traditional relationships? Ultimately, is this issue only important to fringe conservatives? Or is there something deeper here? Something at the very heart of Americans?
I always want to emphasize this point because it is so basic and fundamental that if there's not at least a birth rate which is keeping population constant, then people will disappear.
These are the questions which will bring me across the country, speaking with experts and everyday citizens. Together, we'll explore what the family means today and what it could mean in the future. Make your voice heard on this issue. And to support this documentary, please go to whatisthefamily.com, where you can take our survey and even participate in the documentary directly. Thank you.
Guys, I hope you really enjoyed that trailer. It was so fun to work on that with these guys. But without further ado, Kyle. How's it going, man?
Oh, it's a going.
Well,
I'm
good.
glad to be having this conversation with you, Noah.
Yeah, me too. It's up until now, it's been a while, right?
Yeah, man. It has been really 7 years since I first met you back in 2018 when you had just become a Christian. I've been a Christian for maybe 2 years. And really I think it was the 3 months before you had gone into YWAM that we were just hanging out. Prayer meetings, Bible study, getting into conversations about scripture. And 7 years later, here we are sitting together, having a conversation, attempting to work on a feature-length documentary together. I would not have anticipated that, Noah.
Right. Yeah, it kind of baffles me even still. I mean, it's been a couple months since we decided we're going to do it.
Yeah.
Maybe a couple months. But when I think about it, when I look at the stuff we do, when we just consistently meet and get things done, it continues to blow my mind that we're actually trying to do this.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about like 7-year gap. What was that about?
Yeah,
Okay?
yeah.
You said I went to YWAM. I went to Kansas City and ended up living there for 7 years. I got married. I had kids. And just so happened that I fell in love with filmmaking. I went all in on audio, editing, cinematography, but I wasn't doing it for a living. I was hardly doing it as a hobby. I wasn't
Yeah.
making any films. And I didn't have anybody around me who was trying to pursue that type of creativity.
Yeah.
We meet up and we end up talking about filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks before that, I sold my cinema camera.
Yeah.
I was done with all of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah. Heartbreaking once we decide to embark upon a project. But
yeah.
nonetheless, yeah, providence prevails. That's just the way it goes, though, man. And I think it is really interesting when we had really a kind of couple months where you were debating whether or not you were going to come back to Rochester. And we were just connecting on you asking me, hey, man, where can I find a local church for my family if we were to make the move back up? So we get coffee and we're just having a conversation, catching up because, yeah, it had been quite a few years. But kind of in the interim there, when you would join YWAM, there was this weird overlap period where we tried to meet up because I was living in Phnom Penh at the time in Cambodia, doing missions. You were going overseas and you were going to be in Southeast Asia. And we were like, let's see if we can try to meet up. But that didn't work out.
And I did go to Cambodia.
Yeah.
And I loved it there.
Yeah, that was what was so cool is like we, despite not literally having the same kind of physical proximity or social relationships at the time, we were still kind of embarking on similar journeys and paths, both of us being involved in missions at the same time.
Yeah.
And then really after that, while you were down in Kansas City, when you would come back up to Rochester, we'd still get coffee, we'd hang out. And then when you finally decided to make the move back to Rochester, we found ourselves sitting in Pearson's, having a conversation, just catching up about like you getting married, having kids, myself getting married, being in ministry for 4 years and transitioning out of that and really starting a company where we can do some commercial filming, but really the passion projects, more so like I want to work on a documentary, I want to work on these creative projects. And that's when you pitched to me a project that you had been working on, which is a documentary about the family.
Right.
What was your initial thoughts with respect to trying to do a documentary like this? Because this really was your passion project, even before it was an idea in my mind of something that we could mutually pursue.
Right. So that was kind of my last stand as a cinematographer, if I can put it that way. When I was in Kansas City, I got to the point where my equipment had grown, my skills had grown, and I just wasn't satisfied taking random clips around town or of my family. I wanted to make a project that I could look at, put my signature on, say, that's a complete project. I pursued it as a professional, and I wanted everything to be
done
perfect.
with excellence. Yeah.
So I thought to myself, how can I do that? A short film seems way too difficult. I'd have to be a cinematographer, actor, editor, all the things. And that's not going to be an entertaining short film.
One-man job.
Some people can do it. I can't do that. And so I thought a documentary would be great. Another thing that got me thinking about the documentary was I was with a buddy, and he just kind of was explaining how, movies aren't a great medium for communicating information, that books are vastly superior, which perhaps, but it got me thinking. I was like, how do you just, like, what is the best way to give information to people that they ought to have through film? And I was like, documentary. Documentary, I can do it. I just have to be behind the camera, and I have to find the talent and record them talking. You do you, I'll do me, and it'll be great. I didn't get too far. I think I recorded one guy at a park, and I got a pretty good answer from him. I just asked him, what is your perspective on the family? And I asked him if he thinks people should get married young. And he gave me honest and intellectual answers, which I was really blessed to get right out of the gate. And I was like excited. I was like, this is gonna go great. I think the next person I asked was like on a bench drinking in public with some woman who I thought he was married to. And then I was like, hey, can I ask you a question? And he got really uncomfortable. So it's hit or miss. But, you gotta stick your neck out there. And so I didn't have the name for the film, What is the Family? I just had the idea, I want to show people how beautiful a family can be. And I also want to figure out, not just reveal to other people, but find out why people have backed away from marriage and marriage as it's been known historically.
Yeah, well, that's what we really connected on, I think, in hearing your desire to want to go to a park and just film a guy and just get out there and actually execute and say to a stranger in the middle of a park, what do you believe about marriage? That's rooted not just in the desire to want to go film something and the cinematography behind using a camera, but it's rooted in something deeper for yourself personally and myself, which is this matters, right? What I believe about the family matters, what my community believes, what my country believes about the family. And we've seen really over the past, let's say 50, 60, 70 years, like a massive transformation in the way in which the average American would think about the family. And we were connecting just on a conversational level about that as you had become a husband and a father and I'd become a husband. And we're both coming from a background where we maybe don't have the most clear ideas of what it means to be a good husband, figuring that out for ourselves and saying, more broadly speaking, what does our culture say about this? And you getting out there wanting to pursue this was just such an exciting idea for me because we had mutually wrestled with these things personally, but also the idea of fitting it together into a creative project. It really just got the ideas churning in terms of what could we do if we actually wanted to, not just answer these questions for ourselves, but as you were saying, use film as a medium to communicate about these really vital questions and explore them individually, but more so communicate maybe what the American people think about the family to a wider and more broad audience.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a perplexing question if you think about it, because everybody, like, it's a universal institution, the family.
Everybody has a family.
Right. I
Whether
mean,
you like them or don't, everybody has a family.
if you were born, you have a family. Have or had. And there's always implications from that.
Yeah.
And I think it would do us well as a society and even just as a human race to have a better grasp on what the household ought to look like.
Yeah.
Is there a foundation to the word marriage? Does it have a definition?
Yeah.
Is there a better or a worse version of marriage?
Yeah.
Is there a right and a wrong version of marriage even? And those are controversial questions, but I think just giving them all a fair shake would help a lot of people who might find themselves blindsided by entering in a marriage that they didn't know what marriage was supposed to be.
Or outright rejecting marriage when they don't yet understand what marriage is. Like, that's the thing that always gets me. If someone says, well, man, I don't really want to be married. It's like, what do you mean by married? Do you mean just cohabitating with someone? Do you mean sharing your life with someone, being mutually partnered in a vision for your life and your future, choosing to have kids? Like, if someone says, I don't want to have kids, they're too much of a burden. It's like, what about having children as a burden? What specifically?
Yeah.
So these are some of the questions, and I'm a language nut, man. Like, that's what I did. Wrapped up a season in graduate school this past year where study linguistics. I love meaning. It's like, what do you mean? What do you mean by marriage? Right? Yes, yeah. So wrapped up master's in linguistics, and that was really where I got excited about this idea of a project. Was you were operating on a very personal level, right? Like, what does the individual in the park think of when they think of what is the family?
Right. It was like
what is marriage?
Two-sided contrast.
Yeah. And I really like that idea, but I was also thinking about it from a more kind of like demographics picture of like, what do the American people as a whole think about the family? And what are these larger trends that are going on, not just in our culture, but around the world, with declining birth rates, declining really commitments to marriage, and ever increasing rates of divorce? What's happening in people's minds, not just in the United States, but globally, to, at least in some areas of the world, to have less children or to not want to be married? Right. What is going on? And it really just is not necessarily a question that I have a perfect answer to right now, but it's definitely something that I was just naturally interested in. So the prospect of being able to take what would be a more broader question, what is going on globally, but also to kind of make it personal, where we've had to wrestle with this. Like, What does it mean to be a good father? What does it mean to be a good husband? What do not just Americans, but me as an American, my friend as an American, what do we believe about the family? Those are genuine questions that we have to wrestle with, but they also exist in this kind of broader global context as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, just my own experience being married, I found myself feeling really sad for people who, from my perspective, would buy into these assumptions that were negative about marriage, and just completely reject it. Because when I got married, it was like starting a second life, a life that I had wished I had started earlier.
Yeah.
And I know that's not the case for everybody. There are people who really enjoy their time being single. And I didn't have a hard time being single. I wasn't
Sure.
like just craving a spouse. But when I met my wife and then even going on to have kids, I was just like, man, I wish I had kids sooner. I wish I was married sooner because,
Yeah.
and so I think of all those things, and this is obviously a personal thought process, but it makes me look at other people and say, would you feel the same way if you understood it the way I understood it?
Yeah.
Would you feel the same way if you had tasted it?
Yeah. Did you grow up feeling that way? Like you wanted to have kids, you wanted to have a wife? Because it sounds like, was there a shift at all for you growing up where you went from, man, this is going to be really hard, or maybe having kids, being a husband is going to be very difficult, it's going to be a lot of responsibility, but you knew it was going to be meaningful? Were you aware of these things before you kind of embarked on that path? Or has this kind of been like retrospective where you're looking back going, oh, I'm so glad I did this. That's why I wish I had done it sooner.
Yeah, it was a little bit of both, Kyle. I think my life was a bit of a roller coaster, especially prior to becoming a Christian. So I think as a young kid, all I wanted was what I would consider to have been a complete household. Like my parents were divorced when I was like 3. I never I didn't have like a real experience of them being together.
Yeah.
And I just knew it had to be different. You know, even though that was really the only model I had was them being divorced.
Yeah.
I remember up to like 10 years old just being devastated that my parents didn't love each other.
Yeah.
It was hard.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I think back on that now, and I think that has to be what so many other people went through. And through culture, media, and even just reasoning within themselves, come to the conclusion, well, people just grow apart.
Yeah.
Divorce is as normal as marriage is.
Yeah. Normalizing divorce. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the same idea is saying like death is just part of life. Well, death isn't part of life. It's the end of life.
The opposite of life. Yeah.
It's also a devastating thing.
Yes.
And we don't want to normalize either of those things.
Yeah. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I think that's where these things are not just broad cultural conversations, they're also personal. They affect you, they affect me, they affect the people that we know and love. And if I think about wanting to have kids and how do I want my kids to grow up? Because if I can hear someone who personally goes, man, divorce was such a struggle as a kid seeing it my parents. Oh man, if I'm going to have kids, I have to think, what are my kids going to experience? How does that frame the way that I view whether divorce is normalized or not? And then more than that, how do I want my kids to be if they're a husband, if they're a father, or if they're a wife, or if they're a mother? How do I want them to grow up?
Right.
So these are questions that are both these kind of big capital C cultural questions, but they're also very, very personal, man.
Yeah. It's a beautiful subject. Marriage is a beautiful thing. And obviously you and I agree on that.
Yeah.
But our goal isn't to preach that through the film, but rather to see what comes out of inquiring.
Yeah, so that's, I think, really the vision that in the course of the past couple of months having conversations, right? Going from really having a conversation in a coffee shop saying, or at least hearing you go, yeah, this was something I was working on, to me really mulling that over and then getting you and our other partner, Taylor, all together and sitting us down and saying, I think we could actually do this, guys. I think we could do a real professional project on this. What do you say? You guys being like, yeah, let's do it. Right. And then me saying, great, we're going to New York and DC next week. And then we execute. We get the trailer done and we start actually taking action. But realistically, the vision for the documentary over the past couple of months is we've kind of put these pieces together, see that it's very personally touching for us. We see it as a necessary conversation culturally, not wanting to make a documentary that explicitly states, here's what we believe and why. And let me just tell you all about that. And you use the word like preach, right? To say, this is what I believe, and to make an argument in favor of a particular position. But rather, give a platform to different positions to try to objectively show, hey, here's what people believe when they're not married. Here's what young people believe about marriage as a whole. Here's what people who are married believe about marriage. Some of them secular, some of them religious. Here's what people believe about kids. Some of them secular, some of them religious. But then also speak to experts and then say, generally speaking, how do those that are married feel about marriage? But also, how does this particular person feel about marriage? And to kind of move back and forth to more so present, what is our culture going through right now? And while we have our own position on it, it's not to say ours is this absolutely defined, clear position, because I'm still working through some of these things myself. I know what I believe and why, but I just want to know what's going on in our culture. That's what I don't quite understand yet. I don't know why I grew up feeling like marriage was perhaps optional, divorce was normalized. I know for myself, I never want to be divorced, ever. I want to pursue a faithful marriage with my wife. I want to have kids, and I want my kids to want to have kids and be married and be faithful.
Right.
But I don't know why our culture has had this slow drift over time to not think the same way about that. And why I didn't think of that way for years and years. So more so having the opportunity to explore that in our culture, that's kind of the open-ended question, at least for myself. And I'm very excited to be working on really architecting this vision together with you guys, and not just going to New York and DC, but all across the country.
Right.
And speaking to different people from different walks of life on these very questions and issues.
Dude, just talking about it gets me amped.
I know, man. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too.
Very excited to do this.
Well, I think that really drove the point. All right, I think that wraps everything up. Kyle, is there anything you want to say to the people?
Yeah, I think if you really wanted to support the documentary, the main thing you could do is go to whatisthefamily.com. There's really three main ways to support. You could give directly and financially support the film yourself. We're looking for 150 crowd producers at $150 each. The second thing you could do is just share, follow us on social media, X, Instagram, YouTube. And really the third and most important thing of all of them is to participate in the documentary yourself. If you could go to the survey and take it, it'll only be about 20 minutes long, but the results of that survey are actually going to be featured in the film. And the hope is that that survey will give us a much more clear picture, not just as we go individually across the country, but also as we ask Americans just like you, what is the family? So those are the three main ways. If you really wanted to support this film and support Noah, myself, and our other partner, Taylor, it would be greatly, greatly appreciated by all of us.